our chief guest, DG and head NTIPRIT, Shri Yukesh Srivastav sir. Along with him, we have Shri Srinivas Chaganti sir, DDG ICT at NTIPRIT. So without taking much time, may I now request DDG ICT, Srinivas sir, to give welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Deepak, to everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our Director General, NTIPRIT, sir. The webinar of today is being conducted under his able guidance and leadership. Sir has been a great source of inspiration and support to all of us in NTIPRIT. Welcome to you, sir. Next, I would like to welcome the eminent speakers from the industry. We have Mr. Sharad Arora from Mashmari. He is already there on the as a presenter. The other speakers are yet to join. They are Mr. Arindam Bhattacharya of CDOT, Mr. Rana Kamil of British Telecom, and Mr. Yair from Israel. Next, I would like to welcome officers and colleagues from my organization, from my own organization, that is NTIPRIT, who have joined this webinar. I also welcome my team of officers, Shri Deepak Sharma, Director, Shri Sandeep Bharajwaj, Director, and Shri Siddharth Kumar, ADG. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome all the participants who have registered for the event and joined today's webinar. We have the participants from DOT headquarters, TEC, BSNL, MTNL, TRAI, TCIL, TSPs, ISPs, industry bodies, and academia. My dear participants, India's digital economy is expected to reach $1 trillion by 2025 as per NDCP 2018. The ecosystem is expected to reach 5 billion connected devices by 2022. One of the three missions of NDCP 2018 is Secure India, which requires ensuring sovereignty, safety, and security of digital communications. Device security, authentication, authorization, communication, security applications, data integrity, data privacy, and lawful interception are the essential elements of IoT M2M deployments. Hence, it is necessary to have a standardized, robust security framework. So to achieve these objectives, the webinar of today brings together a panel of national and international expert speakers from across government, industry, as well as M2M to discuss these aspects of IoT and M2M security. The webinar aims to cover various aspects of IoT M2M security, including security threats and mitigation approaches, use of 1M2M standards to create a secure IoT ecosystem, international scenario and best practices, and some of the IoT M2M security solutions that may be used by organizations to ensure security and make their systems trustworthy. The program topics have been very meticulously designed, and the best speakers from the industry have been roped in to take these sessions. So in the first session, we have Mr. Sharad Arora, who is the founder of Mashmari. So he'll be taking the topic on cybersecurity, threats and mitigation approaches in the age of hyper-connected societies. So the second session of today, we have Mr. Arindam Bhattacharya, who is a group leader in CDOT. He will be taking the topic on secured IoT ecosystem using 1M2M. Participants, the third today is IoT M2M Security, International Scenario and Best Practices. So this session will be taken by Mrs. Rana Kamil. She's a solutions manager at British Telecom UK. And the last session of today, that is the fourth session, it is on IoT M2M security solutions, and it will be taken by Mr. Yair. He is from Orchestra Group of Israel. And after that, we have a small brief session of about 15 minutes, wherein we'll take question and answers. I hope this webinar will be useful to all the participants who have joined today. Thank you so much. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir, for the welcome address and briefing the participants about the webinar sessions. So now may I request our chief guest, DG and Head NTIPRIT, Shri Yukesh Srivastava, sir, to inaugurate the webinar with the inaugural address and declare the webinar open. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Mr. Srinivas Chaganti and eminent speakers and number of officers joining from various LSA units, DOT headquarters, Telecom Engineering Center, CDOT, TRA, etc. Welcome to all of you in this webinar on IoT M2m Security. All of you know that IoT M2m is fast emerging as the next revolution after mobile revolution in terms of its penetration, reach, and impact over the quality of life and economy. IoT has the potential to become one of the biggest contributors to the economy world over. The Government of India has identified M2m IoT as one of the fastest emerging technologies across the globe, providing enormous beneficial opportunities for society, industry, and consumers, which is being used to create smart infrastructure in various verticals such as power, automotive, safety and surveillance, remote health management, agriculture, smart homes, industry 4.0, smart cities, etc., using connected devices. Over the past few decades, increasingly affordable computing power, ubiquitous connectivity, and evolving data analytics techniques have opened the door to convergence of control systems, business systems, and internet. And so IoT is providing an amazing opportunity for individuals and enterprises. But with these gains come challenges and risks, and IoT M2m security is one such key area which must be taken very seriously by every stakeholder in IoT M2m ecosystem. IoT security risks and challenges may be categorized into three classes. Firstly, there are risks that are typical in any connected and network system, such as security risk in network, applications, and cloud. Secondly, there are risks specific to IoT devices. And lastly, there are risks to the physical safety, which can cause serious physical harm or damage, as there is need to ensure security and flag gap at all levels. Some of the participants may be aware that 1M2M has been adopted as national standard on IoT M2M. Use of 1M2M standards ensures that only authorized and authenticated and authorized devices can communicate. Moreover, all the applications are required to register themselves with the common service layer specified by 1M2M standard, without which they cannot communicate. However, at present, a large number of proprietary platforms have been deployed in the country which may not comply with the mandated standards, and thus there would be resistance by OEMs, suppliers of such platforms and associated application providers. But it must be appreciated by one and all that by ensuring that all such applications are authenticated and authorized, 1M2M prevents rogue elements from communicating in the network, which may be a serious threat to the entire ecosystem. This is one of the most important features of 1M2M, which alone can be considered as a reason in favor of 1M2M being declared as a mandatory standard. Therefore, all the stakeholders in the country must endeavor to build IoT M2M networks based on 1M2M standard as adopted in India. Further, as IoT M2M ecosystem evolves and develops in our country, it's also equally important to understand the international scenario and best practices being followed, as well as various security solutions that are available and being deployed in IoT 1M2M network. Keeping in view all these dimensions of IoT M2M security, this webinar brings together a panel of national and international experts from government, industry, as well as 1M2M to discuss and enlighten all the participants about these aspects of IoT 1M2M security, such as security threats, mitigation approaches, use of 1M2M standards in IoT networks, international scenario, best practices, as well as IoT M2M security solutions being deployed. I hope that this webinar is going to significantly benefit all the participants, and with so many eminent and veteran speakers available in this webinar, I'm sure that it will certainly benefit you all. With these words, I declare the webinar open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, so much for inaugurating the webinar with your words of wisdom, sir. So before entering the technical session, I would like to profusely thank our DG NTIPRIT, Shri Yukesh Srivastav, sir, for his vision, leadership, guidance, and constant support. Sir, it's only because of the continuous motivation and guidance that we get from you that we are able to conduct so many webinars and training programs on almost all the relevant topics, sir. I would also like to thank DDG ICT, Srinivas, sir, for his mentorship and support in conducting this webinar, sir. We especially appreciate your help in engaging the eminent speakers for this webinar. I also extend my sincere gratitude to all the eminent speakers in this webinar, who despite their extremely busy schedule have kindly consented to deliver the talk and share their knowledge and experience with the participants. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants for sparing their valuable time for attending this webinar. We hope that the webinar is going to benefit all of us. So we have reached the end of the inaugural address. So let's now enter the technical sessions. So just let me share. So our first session is by Shri Sharad Arora. So just Sharadji, just a second. Let me share, introduce you with a small slide. Just give me a second.
Whilst you're bringing up the slide, I just want to say good morning and check if all the audio visuals are working fine.
So I think it's visible, Sharadji?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So dear participants, we have Sharad Arora sir. He's founder from Meshmari. He is the founder of the Meshmari Consultants Private Limited, which is a startup founded to acquire and dedicate resources towards industrial research, development and standardization in the area of remote and rural education, learning management and national capability development in future networks and cutting edge technologies. He is also a member of National Working Group 2017, 13 and 2. Earlier, he was the founder and managing director of Sensorize Digital Services. His expertise in IoT M2m domain includes network and device security in M2m communications, embedded systems, and IoT applications. So with these words, I would now request Sharadji to deliver his presentation on cybersecurity threats and mitigation approaches in the age of hyper-connected societies. Over to you, Sharadji. I'm just stopping the sharing.
I'm just going to check. I'll try to share my side of the screen now.
Yeah.
And in case it becomes visible, then I will continue to present from here. Otherwise, I have also sent the presentation to NTIPRIT. Is my screen visible?
Yeah. Your screen is coming. So I think you can just display the presentation. Yes, we can see the presentation.
Thank you very much. First, my...
We have 30 minutes for this presentation.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Over to
you. First, my gratitude to NTIPRIT, to Mr. Srinivas, and to you, Mr. Sharma, for your extremely hard work and competent efforts in putting together this presentation. My name is Sharad Arora. You have provided a brief introduction, and those words are a bit too many, but thank you for your kind words. I feel always very grateful and also very lucky when I have Mr. Srivastav chairing a session, or for that matter, any initiative. I have the benefit of working under his vision and guidance in the time when he was guiding the Honorable TRAI, and I will have to refer to some of his works at the time in describing how India has set up its national framework, or at least the vision of a national framework. So personally, for me, always a great privilege. And to you, Srivastav Saab, thank you very much for having me. And I will go straight now into the presentation. I will not look at the Mr. Srivastav already described the type of risks. He talked about risks to apps, clouds, physical security, and so on and so forth. I will take a more cyber approach today. And Is my presentation visible? I see a message saying that the presentation is not visible. Mr. Sharma?
The presentation is visible, but just scroll it also so that we can see whether your slides are
sure. So I have scrolled to the next slide.
Yes.
I'm assuming
We are
that
able
it is coming up.
to see the slide also.
Thank you. So as Srivastava Sahab already said very emphatically, that the Internet of Things and the hyper-connected societies, they are melding into each other. And as you can see a little bit from the Beecham research here, there is going to be a very, very significant proliferation, which is already visible. It's here and now. It's in meters, it's in cars. I don't think I need to stay at all in describing to this audience that Internet of Things is very much here. It's about how it is going to further get into our personal and professional lives, and what are those threats and what are those mitigation approaches that can be of use. That is the purpose of my discussion. And why this talk about IoT and IoT security? We said that IoT is virtually getting into each and every area of our personal, professional, and business lives. Everything is so much more data centric and so much more digitalized and so much more automated. As these technologies rapidly evolve, what is happening is that the merged threats of mobility and the internet are becoming a reality for Internet of Things. So I'll keep it really simple. There were a set of threats to mobility, there were a set of threats to internet. And then, of course, as Srivastava Sahab had already stated, then there is the physical aspect of security. So with the Internet of the Things, all these three amalgamated and sigma sets of threats become real. All these threat vectors are real. And exactly what is the real problem? The real problem is that these devices and applications that have infested our homes and lives and offices, they have to make their identity and data accessible. If they were not doing that, then they wouldn't be internet connected and wouldn't be so useful. Whilst doing this, making available of their identity, data resources, applications, etc., they end up being controlled from third parties, or they at least end up having the risk of being controlled from third parties, from exposing their data, from exposing their identities. And that is the soul of the discussion today. How to make sure that whilst these services proliferate, whilst these facilities and features become a reality of our everyday lives, how do we ensure that we don't lose security, we don't lose privacy in this trade between added features and the access that we grant. So we know that there will be billions of these devices, and what I'm going to do in this conversation is a little bit break this whole thing into frameworks, components of what it is that is causing the ecosystem and how it is evolving and what we can do to try to mitigate the risks. So I'm transitioning to the next slide and just checking one more time that the slide is visible, maybe just on the message. The big issue with the internet is, the oldest possible joke I have about is that on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. So nobody knows who's sitting on the other side in reality. It's not like a physical meeting where you meet a person. So what then starts from there is how to cause the trust to be retained. Trust is the foundation of security, and I have picked up a lot of this. Okay, there is still a message that says that slides are not visible. I think I'm just going to confirm one more time whether it's just not visible to some people or not visible to anyone. I'm sorry for this.
See the slides with the dog picture and everything. It's visible to me completely.
Okay, so I'm not going to check again. There are messages coming up which say slides not visible. I presume there could be some issues on the individual user end. I will just wait for Mr. Sharma to stop me in case something becomes invisible. But till then, now I will no further respond to the messages. So I continue from here. So the whole idea becomes how to establish the trust. And for that, we have to not only approach it in a standardized manner, because trust cannot be an equation that is subject to individual use cases, different people, different countries. It has to be a common unifying factor. And that is the most important thing, how to standardize trust. And which is what brings me to the subject, whether it is ITU or it is 3GPP or 1M2M, the common unification of trust, its interpretation and its use in communication is what is going to be critical. And it is in this area that I believe both the Honorable TRAI, DOT, and the ecosystem in India are doing marvelously well. I have my deep, sincere regards for the entire ecosystem, and you'll see why in the next 10-15 minutes as I go through the presentation. So here is the equation that the trust is the foundation of security. Now, security, trust, and ICT infrastructure, let's look at that. This interplay between trust, security, and the ICT infrastructure, age-old CIA security triad, I've known of this for 30 years, that the confidentiality, the integrity, and the authentication in an engagement are what determine the safety with which you are handling that engagement. But then there is that additional fourth very important thing that gets added, which is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation requires ownership. Non-repudiation requires a mechanism that multiple parties can talk to each other and still be in a trustful conversation without necessarily knowing everything about each other from the word go. So security and trust, then let's just say start relying upon CIA plus non-repudiation. And then as time has progressed, standards have discovered many more attributes, which I show on the right side, the stability, reliability, scalability, safety, robustness, all under one ability subject. Integrity, which is the accuracy, the consistencies, the certainty, the recency, all of those add to integrity. And of course, the cooperation and benevolence, which is where I talk about the ownership and the engagement, the non-repudiation aspects. Then if you come down a little bit below to help you understand the trust domains, you would all know that there is a physical world that we all used to belong to, and now there is a cyber world, and then there is a social world. And the mix and mashing of the applications now routinely go between the physical, the cyber, and the social. As a result, we have to examine the whole concept surrounding trust as it relates to these three worlds. And in those worlds, there are ICT and IoT applications. So trusted ICT infrastructures, including service provider trust, will become an extremely important component because we have to use this trust from avenues that are already available. Then how standards define cybersecurity becomes an extremely important thing to look at. I like this definition because it is very simple. It talks about three security layers: network, apps, and user. It talks about security planes, and it talks about the 8 security dimensions. There can be many more. There can be more interpretations. But essentially, from my standpoint, this is a very comprehensive look at how a cyber environment, which includes the users, the connectivity, the internet, the computing devices, and applications, can all be addressed, and comprehensively so. In trying to state this, the idea is basically to make available to the audience a starting point for when you want to do your check, or you want to do a comprehensive checklisting of things that you need to be worried about, then this nature of standardization can be extremely helpful. From here, let me just quickly jump into the subject of my presentation, the cybersecurity threats and mitigation. I will go one by one. I spoke about domains, and I want to reproduce that. There is a physical world, there's a cyber world, and there is a social world. And you all know that we go variously in different places between one and the other. And this is the new age IoT and enabled societal framework. Then we also know that we have both external and internal threat vectors that affect ICT, that come from the ICT world, but go and affect the IoT devices and applications. And there are many of those that are mentioned here in the second picture. The idea for security must then start from provisioning of trust. remember we said that security requires trust. And as a result, how do we provision that trust which uh, our forefathers had when they met each other face to face? They knew by name and by face who was who. When that completely vanishes and you're looking at the physical, cyber, social world meld into one, then provisioning of trust into devices, into applications, into your avatars, into who you are on the internet, who you are in the social world, all that becomes an extremely important point. And as a result, trust registries become important, a subject which Srivastav Saab led with an unequivocally clear vision at the about 7 years back, saying that registration will become important, identity will become important, and so on and so forth. And of course, then there is your network, and the network has got incredible trust capabilities, and those should be looked at or should be harnessed to find a way forward. Whilst investigating this subject as part of a technical team working with the Honorable TEC, the recommendations for IoT M2M security came across three very important uh, attributes: device security classes, registration and certification, and use case classification and compliance. This, to my mind, this investigation and recommendation at the TEC in 2019 formed an incredibly important basis for how the frameworks that the Honorable TRAI had spoken about, how those could become real. So it mentions the need for root of trust based identity, because if the identity itself is tamper proof, is not tamper proof, then any aspects of trust become automatically compromised. It talked about the registration of these identities and the use of authentication in order to know whether it's the same device, the same person, or the same social actor, same social avatar that you wanted to talk to, who is currently talking to you. Then there was also, you can't have the same treatment, can't have the same set of security parameters applied to each and every use cases. A simple temperature monitor deployed in some distributed region doesn't need the same level of security, for instance, as compared to a home gadget that affects your health or manages your health. So that was just to explain that use cases required classification, and against those classifications they require a separate treatment for compliance, separate treatment for what is the quality of service, what is the minimum authentication level, what is the minimum encryption level, and what is the minimum non-repudiation, if you recall the fourth pillar. What is the KYC, what is the nature of identity and KYC required in order to assure that trust which must be built for that particular class of use cases. So this is an extremely good compendium which you can read more on. It deep dives into almost 100 use cases to lay bare what is needed for which type of use case and classification. Moving forward, then there is this very large scale threat for smart cities that are more and more connected with cameras, with speed monitors, with flow controls, and so on and so forth. And for that, the approach that this country has taken, and as I said at the very start, there is an incredible amount of good going on in this country as respect to IoT and security. And having taken an approach that TSDSI is transposing and TEC is endorsing, the 1M, 2M standards as national standards, gives us, in my opinion, a very good starting point for making a uniform set of IoT standards. And because 1M, 2M also addresses quite ubiquitously the attributes of applications, devices, and security, it's a good starting point to invest in. I have knowledge that a speaker of great respect is coming in just after perhaps my presentation. So I'm not going to go at all into the details of what 1M, 2M is or what the common service layer platform is, but I can state without any doubt that it is of great importance. Beyond the 1M, 2M architecture for smart cities is also then the whole concept of data sharing. One is to know your devices, and the other is to know the data governance aspects of the devices and applications. And in that area, I think the convergence of TSDSI's standards, BIS and 1M2M is happening rapidly in this country, which is a great show of strength that the Bureau of Indian Standards, the Telecom SSO, TEC, and the global 1M2M seem to converge. And I state with a lot of pride and happiness that with the next speaker, Mr. Bhattacharya, I had the privilege of co-authoring the IoT RA, and it is a very, very good compendium, not saying it because we authored it, but because of the way it uniformly ingests the best of 1M2M, ITU, and the security principles in 3GPP at sea. Moving on from there, TEC made an invaluable contribution to the global ITU standards in 2021. Under Mr. Verma's leadership, TEC proposed and ITU standardized after 3 years of reviewing and investigating a framework for bootstrapping of devices and applications. And this submission from this original creation of a standard for bootstrapping of devices and apps based on service provider trust, to my mind, is the most frugal, adaptable, and interoperable mechanism to achieving identity and registration. It is now a global standard called ITOT Y.3056, and I want to encourage the audience to read it. It not only describes how a technology agnostic approach can be taken to trusted devices and applications, but it also very importantly says how to interleave and use the capability that India has. India is one of the unique 9 countries that has its own root certification authority. India can generate its own certificates. And as a result, India stands in a very unique position to have data sovereignty and security sovereignty by using its own digital certificates. And the standard contributed by TEC actually utilizes both private and public certificates, making it a possible framework for adoption wide scale. And then, of course, I have been both a student and mesmerized by the vision that Srivastav Saab had for the Trust Center. And I've seen it convert itself into so many different manifestations. I think MTCTE was another recommendation at his time from the honorable regulator, and all of that is now starting to look real. So this is a framework, to my mind, the best in the world. And I state without doubt, the best in the world about how standards, how bootstrapping, and how MTCTE type certification can create a national class approach to institutionalizing IoT security. And this involves registration, it involves certification. And because there are wheels are moving in each of these independent areas, including with the 1M2M certification, to my mind, this is the most capable representation of how an IoT framework can be standardized in this country. And I think the efforts should be made by many contributions coming in here to then globalize this approach, because repositories need to talk to each other. Like you have in GSM, the CEIR and the EIR concept, that there's a central EIR, and then there are country-wise, operator-wise equipment identity registers. Similar to that, this concept of having registration and security for IoT devices and apps can actually proliferate globally. It has the capability, the framework has the bandwidth, so to say, of addressing a global scenario as well. The role of a service provider in adding this security for IoT devices and applications, both recorded with the ETSI generic bootstrapping architecture and now with TEC's ITU Y.3056, actually provide a very unique and frugal mechanism for adding the required identity and authentication. And this slide basically says that add to these two areas the citizen KYC, add to it the citizen identity Aadhaar, and I think we have what can be called the most ready set of building blocks for a very usable and standardized IoT security framework. This framework actually has been sort of deployed in India at a very massive scale now, which is for securing under the Nirbhaya framework. The government wanted that public service vehicles be secured in a fashion that there could be identification, there could be location, and then there could be alarms from the vehicles. And in this particular instance, through a process of sectoral standards, AIS 140 basically decided to use the root of trust called the eSIM and use the a central, call it the common service layer, but use one or more repositories of vehicles, of drivers, vehicles position, and you can see it here, this layer. So between the communication standards and between a sectoral standard, AIS 140 created a unique integration to create a scalable national class security framework. And it can serve as a very representative next example for meters, smart cities, etc. And as I just show here, it brings in the concept of the common service layer, brings in the concept of remote management, availability, and of course, access layer security too. Then, of course, also must not end an IoT security or an IoT standards discussion without mentioning just the scale of work that's been done over the last 2013 and now almost 9 years in TEC. It has created some of the most informative and relevant reports, and that include smart homes, that include communication technologies, and recently now accelerated with Code of Practice for Securing Consumer Internet of Things, IoT ICT standards for smart cities, framework of National Trust Center, that was released March 2022. And then there are so many other initiatives surrounding security by design, etc., that are in the works. So as I said, very proud of the Indian ecosystem and how it is evolving. A bit, I'm coming from communications background. I've been in telecoms for more than 30 years now. But our next purpose in life is to grow capability in this country. And over the next 5 to 7 years, I would like to see how 5G networks, future networks, I think 5G will be a short-lived one, 6G more than 5G, how future networks, how augmented reality and how digital twinning can provide a mechanism for frugal and high quality education for the masses. That's going to be our investigation in time to come. It's a little bit about me, and thank you very much. Thank you again to NTIPRIT, and thank you, Srivastava sir. Mr. Sharma, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, sure. Any participants having any question? Although we take all the questions at the end. Raise your hand. Okay. We don't have any question right now. So I would like to thank Mr. Sharad Arora for the presentation, giving an overall perspective on the IoT security. You threw light on the TEC technical reports on IoT security and other aspects. The security concern for smart city architecture, TEC contribution, and so many things. So we are really thankful to you. Thanks, Sharji.
Thank you very much.
So now we have our next speaker, Mr. Arindam Bhattacharya from CDOT, who will deliver a session on secured IoT ecosystem. Anandanji, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Hello.
So just before you, yeah, we can see your slides. Thanks a lot. But kindly stop sharing the presentation just for a second.
I'll stop the share.
I need to just introduce you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Kindly wait for a minute. Have you stopped? Still, it's actually. Yeah. Thanks. Mr. Arindam Bhattacharya is the group leader on IoT at CDOT. He leads the activities of IoT M2m communication in CDOT. He has been a key contributor to various policies and roadmap documents of DOT on M2m communication and IPv6, etc. He is an advocate of standardization of the M2m IoT communication. He contributes actively in 1M2M, which is the international standardization body on IoT M2M. He has also contributed significantly in various technical reports issued by TEC as convener for IoT reference architecture in BIS and in formulation of the policy document for the standardization of intelligent transportation system in NITI Aayog, to name a few. So, may I now request Mr. Arindam to take over? I am just stopping the sharing. Yeah, welcome Arindamji. So you can start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, a very good morning to all joining from India and the Indian subcontinent. And I believe there are people who have joined from around the. So, very good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to the international audience as well. So today I'm going to give a very brief presentation on ecosystem using 1M2M. So because we are pretty much invested into 1M2M, which is now the national standard for IoT M2M ecosystem in India. So I'll be talking about how security is important from the perspective of IoT, and at the same time how using 1M2M we will be ensuring that security, what is there in store with 1M2M when we use 1M2M. This will further be elaborated by my next speaker, Ms. Rana Kamil. So here is my presentation. Is my slide visible?
Yes, visible. Go ahead and just change it once.
Okay.
So that we can see.
Yes, it looks perfect.
Did it forward?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Okay. For optimal use of bandwidth, I'm just stopping my video so that people do not have interruptions in the presentation part of it. Okay.
Sure.
So as we know, I mean, we have been pretty much aware about the secured aspect of the computers in the cybersecurity domain. So if I have to draw parallels between the two, when we talk about the Internet of Computers, we know that it is attended by humans or owners, and it's under a comfortable controlled environment. More or less the locations are fixed, unless of course people are using internet using their mobiles. Low latency broadband connections are needed for the applications that are required to be run on the internet being used using computers, and a few chipsets and operating systems to secure. From a security standpoint, we do not have a very large domain to take care about, and largely deployed apps are known, and a uniform lifetime. So you do not have a very long lifetime requirement. So
Your voice is cracking, Arinanji, थोड़ा सा. Your voice is slightly cracking.
Sorry, any comments?
Your voice was
Hello?
cracking, now it's okay. Your voice was cracking actually. Now it's okay.
Now it's okay? Okay.
Yes.
So billions of targets online. Now, since the computer proliferation had been there since many years, so over the years it has grown to be a lot. And internet as an entry point, and software patches and security patches are very frequent. So frequent that within a day you will find multiple security patches. And the cost of attacks is decreasing day by day. So the efforts and the resources required to attack a particular system, which used to be humongous a few years ago, now has come down. So it's a virtual world, and the impact is for information. So what can be stolen is information, and it can also impact in the monetary aspect of it. Now, come to think of Internet of Things, when we talk about IoT in particular, majority of the IoT endpoints are unattended by owners. The conditions are harsh because it is kept on. These are sensor-based devices. So those devices are left in the field. So they are mostly unattended, and physical exposure is available. So anybody can have access to those kind of devices. And mobility is pretty high, and constrained throughput latency, because many a times you only require one transaction maybe in a day in certain cases. Obviously, in certain other cases, depending upon the use case, the latency requirement and the throughput requirement can be high, but more often than not, the requirement is low. Now, diversity of embedded hardware and software, and multitude of lifetime ranges from months to years to decades, and constrained, the requirement is of long battery life, long life. So constrained power, memory processing. You cannot have heavy processing available on your end nodes, field nodes. So, and the flip sides are hundreds of billions of targets, where we had billions of targets in a very short time because of the proliferation and the low cost and ubiquitous network availability. The number of devices that we are talking about now is running into hundreds of billions. Many more weaker entry points. So internet is not only the entry point, the local physical system is also an entry point. Weaker, possibly unmaintained software, all available and accessible. And real world impact is physical safety, because a transducer can sense, an actuator can actually cause havoc. So imagine the case where a very innocuous looking application, or maybe a traffic light signal, if that is compromised, what havoc it can cause to the traffic that is running across the city. So with this backdrop, we move forward and see. So now you must have understood the difference. So it's cybersecurity. We know that we have done something to mitigate the challenges to some extent, not entirely. It's still a threat which looms large, but now we are talking about containing the threat domain in the Internet of Things, and we know that we are talking about very big problem. So if we move. Sorry. As I said, very large attack surface, limited device resources, complex ecosystem, fragmentation of standards and regulations. Because proprietariness is, every app deployment that you see is a siloed deployment in itself. So you do not know. So the proprietariness is what is causing even more damage to this ecosystem, because there's no standardization which has been put in place in the deployment so far. The deployment is widespread, and the security integration is heterogeneous secured system, and the safety aspects are interaction with the real world. It's not just the virtual world, it's a real world interaction. Real actions are taking place in the field. Cost constraint is very high because you cannot have a costly solution to mitigate the threats. Security update is a challenge, and insecure programming and time to market is very short. So the liability is also unclear, that it is whose liability to ensure the security of those devices. So these are the challenge, very tough challenges. Now the IoT is also changing. IoT 1.0 was when we were talking about a few years ago about big data analytics in the cloud, upstream sensor data, sending data to the cloud, and we do big data analytics in them and churn out intelligence out of it and take certain actions on them. So it was primarily concerned with exploiting huge amount of information. The information was the main, gathering element, so which needed to be collected and analyzed, and certain output needed to be generated. Now, it used to be centralized, many clients to one server. It was predictable, asynchronous connection addressed by traditional cybersecurity, because cybersecurity and that IoT ecosystem was kind of similar, and privacy was a main security driver at that point in time. Jump to IoT 2.0, and we have a closed loop autonomous system. You want the actions to happen in an autonomous way. We are going to talk about driverless vehicles, driverless cars, CV2X, and so many other domains of IoT. And with 5G coming in, we are talking about the health sector is also talking about automated health detection and mitigation. The ICD devices will be taking care of patients on its own. So these kind of use cases, when it is going to find a place in the real world, the threat threat surface also now increases. The quantum of threat is also increasing. So now, rather concerned with the problem, distributed many-to-many, multi-roles, dynamic, real-time connections. Critical infrastructures now are requiring physical protection in addition to cybersecurity, so that people who have physical access to those endpoints are not able to do much damage in terms of changing the software, changing the hardware, right? Changing the identity of the nodes. So human safety is as strong as the security of the information that is required at the endpoint. So the human safety is becoming more and more important in case of the current IoT ecosystem. A little bit about 1M2M, at what we are trying to do. What is 1M2M about? For those who do not know, because now majority of the people know what 1M2M about. 1M2M is a partnership project of 8 SDOs. TSDSI is our very own SDO, our own SDO here. Apart from that, we have ATIS, TIA, HC, TSDSI, CCSA, TSDSI our own, CCSA, TTA, Arab, and TTC. Across the globe, you can see their footprint. And it's basically, the objective was to create the standards for IoT. And it was created in 2012 by HC, and handed it over to 1M2M consortium in 2012. The 1M2M partnership project in 2012. So we are completing 10 years very soon, in the next month to be precise. We have so far released 3 releases. The last one was released in 2018, and the next one, release 4, is going to come very soon, in a couple of months. It has been completed, so only the customary changes in the documentations are happening. So it conducts various interop events in order to see the interoperability between various implementations and do conformance testing also. So there are open source implementations as well, and there are commercial implementations. So both are coexisting. These are open standards for IoT, and these open standards are being supported by 200 member organizations who are part of 1M2M, who are the members through the SDOs, which are actually forming 1M2M. So the work process of 1M2M is that from every sector which requires IoT or which uses IoT in some form of use case, the requirements are gathered and they are collected in a document called TS0002, and that gives genesis to two documents. One is technical reports and the other is technical specifications. So the technical specifications are then utilized by the implementers to implement solutions which actually are subjected to test in test events, and the feedback of the test events come back to the technical specs to modify. Besides that, the technical plenaries also work extensively to bring about changes with respect to the use case or with respect to what modifications are required on those specifications to make it more worthy for larger implementations. And certificate is also backed by a very robust certification framework, which is provided by the Global Certification Forum. And there are now many agencies which are now providing certification and providing test suits and test kind of testing devices as well. So what is the standard about? This is a standard which is based on the common service layer, which my friend Sharad Daroda just also mentioned in his presentation. So the service layer is as against the very siloed kind of an implementation and devices, the application, everything was very actually brings all the ingredients of the IoT ecosystem as a service function. So they are provided through a service layer. Using this service layer, people can develop their applications, innovative applications, and any kind of application can be deployed by making use of those functions as service, available as service. So this is a standard for middleware platform. It sits between applications and processing communication hardware. So it's there on sensors, actors, gateways, cloud, and authentication, authorization, encryption. It connects producers and consumers securely. That is from the sensors which are actually producing the data, and the consumers, that are the applications which are sitting behind, which are requiring those inputs to actually take actions or analyze them to produce the output that is needed for somebody to take decisions. So that is, secured, and it hides the complexity. It is actually agnostic to any kind of technology or any kind of hardware or software. So it hides the complexity of network usage from applications. So you can use any network, any kind of personal area network, home area network, sensor network, or wide area network. It supports all. Though there is very close interworking with the standard, which are in place, 3GPP being one of them. 1M2M is very, very robustly integrated using a interworking mechanism with 3GPP. So it interworks with many such standards. So 3GPP is the most important one to mention right here. So it stores and shares data. It increases the efficiency of data transport. It also controls when communication happens, so that it is not always that backend application has to always probe or poll when that data comes. So you can control that a meter can send data only maybe during once in a day, and till that time it can collect all the information within itself, and when the network usage is most optimal, it can send the data back to the platform or the service layer. So it manages the device and life cycle, which is very large scale, and it can also do notification about events that come in the form of information from the sensors and devices, and it can also talk to a group of things at one point in time. So this is a very brief summary of all that it can do. It can do much more in a much more way, but this is a very brief summary of the 1M2M standard for IoT M2M. So security, as you can see, these are the 14 common service functions as was published in release 3. Release 4 is adding many more common service functions. Security is one of the major, very vital function available. So as you can see, security has embedded into this. So it's not trying to obscure devices that okay, certain very siloed obscure security. That's not the case. So here security becomes a very paramount objective of this. This slide talks about the collaboration around 1M2M, which I spoke about. So any established standard or any established protocol, it is all, I mean, included in this framework. This is the typical architecture in which 1M2M is, I mean, kind of deployed. These are the nodes that are qualified in 1M2M, right? So as you can see, any application can only talk through a common service entity or common service layer, which is available on field nodes like middle node or application service node. And there's an infrastructure node which is available in either in the form of a cloud or on-prem infrastructure. And the business application on the top accesses the information only through the CAC. Now, this framework actually ensures that anything and everything cannot be directly connected to. So the AE has to talk through the CAC in a very authenticated and authorized fashion. So thereby it kind of mitigates the possibility of anybody changing anything, because the allowed communication is only through the CAC. Obviously, this actually reduces the domain of the threat to some extent, but not entirely. I mean, people can still attack the system if it is on the internet, but I mean, it reduces that to some extent. Now, in addition to that, there are certain other features and functions which actually, so these are the certain, this particular slide talks about the various releases and the feature sets and included on those releases. I'll just simply, that's not the topic. Now, abstraction, that is the key of 1M2M. So as you can see, all layers we have, you use cellular, fixed, Wi-Fi, TLS-PSK, TLS-PKI, DTLS-PSK, or anything, HTTPS, QoP-S, MQTT-S, the protocols, the serialization, XML, JSON, CBOR. Now, interworking, you use OCF, OMA-DM, BBF, lightweight M2M. The ontologies you use, SARF, W3C, TD, anything that you can choose. This is an abstraction. So you may choose any kind of network, any kind of security framework, any kind of protocol, any serialization, and can connect to that. So the device security abstraction is one of the key abstraction capabilities besides the other abstractions, whether it is semantic ontology abstraction, network abstraction, services and management abstraction, or content type serialization abstraction, or transport protocol abstraction. IoT device security abstraction is a very key element of this entire framework. So 1M2M hides the complexities by virtue of these abstractions. And it can interact with the diversity of IoT devices at the same time. So any kind of device, it brings to the table universal pluggability, and that too in a very secured fashion. So these are the functional roles. I will simply skip this because of paucity of time. So the main security functions that are supported in 1M2M are identification and authentication, security association establishment, authorization, that is access control, and remote provisioning. So in identification is checking if the identity of the request originator provided for authentication is valid. Authentication is validating if the identity supplied in the identification step is associated with a trustworthy credential. Now, the security association establishment is a establishment of security context between the communicating entities. Now, this is used to provide confidentiality. So that means that the data encryption it takes place by virtue of this and the integrity of that particular communication. Now, as you have seen earlier, a range of authentication options are supported. Now, access control, it has got a very, robust access control framework where it's actually based on REST architecture, REST framework. So in REST, we use only create, retrieve, update, and delete, and notify. So the entire framework is based on resources. So a sensor produces the instance of information. So we call it content instance. So the containers are created. So the resource tree is there for any particular use case. So that information goes in the form of a content instance for a particular, like a temperature sensed by a temperature sensor, goes as a content instance, and that content instance is stored in some container on which access control policy defines who is allowed access to that particular container. So thereby the access is restricted by a very close kind of access control framework. Now, apart from that, the data can be encrypted end-to-end. So we can provide end-to-end encryption. We can provide a hop-by-hop encryption. So thereby mitigating the threat of that information getting
Arindam, your voice is not coming. Arindam ji.
Arindam ji, we are not getting you.
Orindam, I believe you're having technical issues. I'm not sure if you can hear us. Hello?
Hello, Rana, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
hi, hello, hi there. I was just waiting for Orindam. Oh, Orindam, oh, hi. Hi, Deepak, how are you?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, I think there was some problem at his end, so he may be rejoining.
Sure, so I can wait for a few minutes in case
Yes.
he comes back.
Yeah, I'll announce it separately. Just wait for
Sure,
a
sure. Thank you very much. I seem to be having technical issues as well, so apologies in advance if I get cut off at any point.
No issues, no issues. We'll let you know.
Thank you.
आपने जिस व्यक्ति को कॉल किया है
Yeah, he's joining again, so kindly wait for a few seconds. I'll just talk to him. Arindam is joining again. Actually, he's facing some issues, so he's joining through mobile. So Arindam is joining shortly. So I think he is not able to join.
Deepak, he was almost done with his
Yes, yes, yes.
presentation. I think only one
Right.
functionality was left.
M2M. Yeah.
So I could
So-
cover it if he's okay with
Yes.
that, because I know the one he was going to present, the one that's left. So I could cover that if he likes.
Right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So, dear participants, because Mr. Arindam was not able to join, he's not able to join. So we move on to our next session by Ms. Rana Kamil. So from British Telecom. So just let me, before I request her to start the presentation, just let me introduce her to you. Just give me a second. Yeah. So Mr. Rana Kamil is an IoT and Ecosystem Architecture Solutions Manager at British Telecom. So before joining the architecture and technology strategy area, she was a security consultant providing consultancy across all of BT's customer-facing units. She currently owns several internal standards and represents BT in 1M2M, the ITUT and 3GPP. She has over a decade of experience in research and academia and the telecommunications industry. She has a strong interest and experience in IoT, cybersecurity, research, and developing technical standards. So with this, may I now request Rana to start the presentation. I'm stopping my sharing.
Thank you very much, Deepak, and thanks for the invite. It's always an honor to be joining you, and
We are grateful to you.
thank you so much. I'm very happy to be a part of this presentation. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Your screen is visible.
Okay. Perfect. Just 1 second.
You can enter the, yeah. We can see the presentation mode also.
Okay, perfect. So let me first start by talking about 1M2M specifications. 1M2M specifies a distributed software and middleware layer, and this sits between applications and underlying communication networking, hardware and software, integrated into devices, gateways, and servers. It bridges communication technologies like fixed, narrowband IoT, 4G, 5G, and LoRaWAN. It bridges all these communication technologies for IoT. It also internetworks existing solutions and data models. It helps manages data and allows to annotate data with semantic descriptions. So in general, let us talk about IoT security and why it's a complex issue. So when we think of IoT security, IoT covers a wide range of issues. There are so many components that contribute to an IoT system. So this includes connected devices, gateways, platforms to manage IoT deployments, and data-consuming endpoints in the form of applications and visualization displays. So the task of collecting and communicating data between all these elements uses an array of proprietary and standardized data protocols and illustrates the permutations and complexity of IoT systems. As a consequence, the issue of IoT security is not very straightforward, like encrypting the transmission of data between a sensor and an application, for example. So deployed IoT systems are very complex and involve large numbers of connected devices and sensors. Communication paths might involve multiple hops via intermediate gateways, for example. So beyond the technical level, there are also operational issues of remotely managing field devices in a secure manner. So there may be requirements to integrate equipment supplied by different vendors and their chosen technology protocols. Now, when we think of three main issues that define IoT security, it is important to work back from these three key issues. The first one is the proliferation of connected standards, device operating systems, and use cases. So security has to work across a large number of permutations. As a result, IoT users need a standardized and system-based approach, which forms the basis for efficient mixing and matching. You need to make all these devices with different vendors work, so there needs to be interoperability. Secondly, designers must work on the basis that IoT devices and applications will operate as unattended applications, like my colleague mentioned previously. So this calls for a different mindset to working with human users in the loop, as common in telephony and many enterprise IT systems, for example. So in the IoT scenario, this involves designing security from the outset and automating many security functions that might usually be carried out through human intervention. A third issue that comes to mind would be IoT device lifecycle. So IoT devices generally operate with a long service lifecycle. In addition, there may be limited scope for access or physical replacement. In contrast, the user expectations move as fast as the consumer market. So security, therefore, needs to bridge these timing differences. And this requires cost-efficient security management tools, which are more likely to result from standardization. So let me talk very briefly about building a coherent architecture for IoT systems. So the challenge of designing effective security solutions for IoT systems has to be situated in the context of a generalized architecture that captures as many use cases as possible. With this goal in mind, the 1M2M partnership project embarked on a goal of defining the standards for IoT systems in 2012, and this was done with the support of several national standardization bodies that tried to avoid regional variations and promote a global IoT market on a par with cellular industry. So 40% of economic impact of IoT requires interoperability between IoT systems. So we have 11.1 trillion potential economic impact of IoT, which is a huge number, and India is at the forefront of IoT developments. It has been a very impressive examples of integrating IoT into everyday life. And after collaborating with M2m, we are feeling very positive that the growth will continue and we will continue to collaborate. So for managing all these IoT devices, an integrated solution is needed since the market is highly fragmented with small vendor-specific or sector-specific solutions. So we need standards that integrate all of these. So why do we use M2m? So it is a standard du jour dedicated to enable horizontal IoT integration, data management and data historization, very dynamic privacy and access control. It is secure, store and exposure for historical data, storage and exposure for historical data, data search and aggregation, context information, real-time control and actuation, field device management. It is flexible in deployment, has a scalable architecture, and designed, and most importantly, designed to be an internetworking framework for legacy field and core technologies, as well as a proprietary solution. It is internet friendly for human interaction, and it is simple if you use the core functions and know your deployment architecture. So let me skip this slide. Just very briefly summarizing the connectivity, deployment, and integration. M2m is based on a store and share resource REST-based paradigm. The data may be made available in the platform to other applications. Privacy is ensured by strict access control management. It is heavily reusing underlying network functionalities, and it is an internetworking framework designed to connect different IoT technologies. Most importantly, it integrates the vertical silos. So let me talk about IoT use cases across different industry verticals, research and commercial representatives, identifying the elements of a distributed architecture. So the lower layer corresponds to the device and communication technologies. Sorry, I think I'm missing one slide here. It's okay, we don't need it. So I'm just talking about the upper layer and the lower layer. The lower layer corresponds to the device and communication technologies, and the upper layer corresponds to the application that uses data from IoT devices and sensors to identify operational trends for decision making. The middleware arrangement creates an abstraction layer that masks the underlying technical complexities of connecting applications to source of data. Okay, let me skip that. So we have requirements. I'm sorry, someone's mic is not muted. So technical reports and technical specs. Security in M2m release 2 to release 4 included in enrollment services, secure communication services, access control and authorization services. So secure environment concept abstracts the security implementation. It exposes common service to applications. 1 second, apologies. And provides common interface for remote security administration. It supports implementations distinguish 4 security levels. No additional security, so devices are protected from attacks. Software-only security, trusted execution environment, and tamper-resistant hardware embedded secure elements, ESE. So this is a brief summary of Release 2 features, including industrial domain enablement, management, semantics, security, dynamic authorization that my colleague mentioned earlier, end-to-end security, enrollment and authorization APIs, distributed authorization, decentralized authentication, interoperable privacy profiles, and secure environment abstraction. So these are the main security features. So one M2M provides a common set of security capability. One M2M provides a common set of security capabilities to secure IoT devices and applications and to prevent and mitigate attacks. And it exposes an abstracted set of security-related APIs to help simplify security for IoT devices and applications. So the main functions we have supported in one M2M is identification and authentication. So checking if the identity of the request originator provided for authentication is valid. Then we have authentication, validating if the identity supplied in the identification step is associated with a trustworthy credential. We have security association establishment, which is establishing a security context between communicating entities to provide confidentiality, and a range of authentication options supported. We have authorization, authorizing services and data access to the authenticated entities, as well as remote provisioning. There are additional security functions, which I will not go through in detail for the sake of time, like identity protection, sensitive data handling, which is very important, as well as security administration. In parallel with standardization, a family of security capabilities for IoT system, one M2M is currently nearing the end of transposing its security specification into the ITUT SG20Y series for security and privacy protection. So the collaboration with the ITUT has been very important for us because the ITUT standards are rather international. To have the opportunity to collaborate with more international organization makes one M2M standards more accessible worldwide. So the rest of the presentation has explanation of several security functions like enrollment and provisioning, M2m enrollment function, MEF, and message security between adjacent entities. It explains lots of these functions in technical details, as well as the privacy policy manager. I could explain these functions. I'm not sure if we have time to explain all of them, but I put some publicly accessible links here. Developers guides, technical questions, public specifications, webinars, our YouTube channel, and future events. You have my email address if you would like any explanation or details about any of these security functionalities. I would be happy to explain them all in details. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. But let me say one final thing about security, that it is very important for developers to incorporate security at the fabric of the projects as early as possible. Sometimes competition or other industry factors puts pressure on projects to launch as quickly as possible. But security is not a tick box exercise. We need to make sure that all these security functions are incorporated to make sure that we avoid any risks in the future and to have secure projects. And also it helps us avoid dealing with security breaches in the future. So security is a necessity, and it's important for it to be incorporated in all parts of and all aspects of every project. And in one M2M, we really value security. Thank you very much. I could explain some of these, but I think it would take a long time. Would you like me to go through some of these functions before ending the presentation? Like privacy policy manager or so let me explain privacy policy manager quickly, then I will end the presentation. It is one of our functions. So it's a personal data management framework. It converts a user's privacy preference into access control information in order to protect the user's personally identified information, PII, from access by unauthorized parties. Access control information consists of static and dynamic access control policies, ACP, and it uses terms and conditions markup language to derive consensus between the user's privacy preference and application service providers' privacy policies. So all the our security function descriptions is available in these slides, which will be made available. And if you have any questions, please reach out by email. And thank you very much once again.
Yeah, anyone having any question? Yeah, Rana, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to join the webinars and presentations.
Video for a second. Can you switch on your video?
Deepak, there is in the chat box, there is a message from Bindu Srivastava. So she's asking, of course, she has thanked Rana, and again, she's asking, could you elaborate the enrollment functionality?
Rana, could you elaborate the enrollment functionality?
Sure, absolutely. Let me go back to the enrollment functionality. So M2m enrollment, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes, absolutely. So M2m enrollment functionality, MEF. We have had, 1 second, is there? Yes, so MEF, M2m enrollment functionality. It is a function that allows 3 types of remote security provisioning frameworks, which we refer to as RSPF. So it allows symmetric key authentication, RSPF, certificate authenticated, RSPF, and GBA authenticated, RSPF. In this case, the MEF is the bootstrapping service function, BSF, of 3GPP generic bootstrapping architecture, which is referred to as GBA. So the MEF acts as the bootstrapping server for this GBA. The MEF, as seen in the diagram here, can trigger the field device to execute a variety of procedures, including configuration of field devices with registration parameters and authentication profile applications to the operational security frameworks, which will be seen in the next slide. It also includes provisioning of symmetric key credentials and provisioning of certificates, certificate re-enrollment using EST and SCEP specified by IETF recommendations. So MEF is operated by M2m service provider or a trusted third party, like a device manufacturer or an underlying network operated. It can be operated by either the service provider or the manufacturer underlying network operator. We can talk about message security between adjacent entities, the operational security framework. So it uses datagram transport layer security protocol, which is DTLS version 1.2. Several security association establishment frameworks are supported, which are authentication and session key establishment using symmetric keys, then authentication and session key establishment using certificates provided provisioned to devices, Then the authentication facilitated by an M2m authentication function, MAF, hosted by M2m SP or a third party, as we mentioned earlier. We have, if we explained MIF, we may as well very quickly explain authorization and access control, if it's okay. So, Bindu, do you have any other questions about MIF? Here we have the diagrams and we have explained it. I will very quickly go through authorization and access control. So one M2M is based on a RESTful architecture. The API is based on requests to perform an operation on a resource. Operations are create, retrieve, update, and delete. These are the technical, this is the sequence of the operations: create, retrieve, update, and delete. So one M2M service layer supports configurable access control policies that defines clear rules dictating for each resource. Who is authorized to access, what operations are allowed, and under which conditions, like time and location of entity. Once we established who, what, and which conditions, then it becomes clearer on how we can configure these access control policies. So resource access is authorized based upon satisfying at least on access policy control, at least one, it's not on, sorry, there's a typo here, at least one access policy control rule in one of the linked ACPs, like it can be seen in the diagram. Let me explain the final one very briefly, please. The dynamic authorization. So the last function I'm going to explain is the dynamic authorization. So in this function, as seen in the diagram, the originator or hosting CSE requesting authorization of originator, it is provided by the dynamic authorization system, DAS server. So direct dynamic authorization, it is hosting the CSE. The hosting CSE submits the request to DAS. Originator is not communicating with DAS server at this point. This is the direct dynamic authorization. Indirect one, the originator submits the request to DAS using the info provided by the hosting CSE. It is a bit similar to open authentication, OAuth mechanism. So it has to do. It has to go through the DAS server using the information provided by CSE. Then the third one would be DAS having multiple options for authorizations, like issuing and updating access control rules and assigning roles to the originator, issuing JSON web tokens, JWT. The process can be seen in this diagram here. Then we have a privacy policy manager, which we applied earlier. There are some other functions like enrollment and provisioning, and details about other functions. And if you please, if you would like any elaboration on any of the functions or more detailed diagrams, please reach out. And thank you very much once again.
Yeah, Rana, there is one query from Bindu again.
Yes, hi Bindu.
Just a follow-up, the MF agency, third party, should it be an independent agency beyond the service provider so that application across multi-service providers can also interact?
Yes, yes. That is correct.
Bindu, did I answer your question?
Sorry?
I'm asking Bindu whether this answers your
sorry.
question.
Sorry. My line is cutting off a little bit, so I couldn't hear.
So any participant want to ask anything from Rana may please raise his or her hand so that we can enable the mic.
I just want to thank Rana for an excellent presentation. Rana, thank you. This is Sharat.
Oh, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to join the webinar, and I very much enjoyed the presentations that that were given by fellow colleagues, and thank you so much once again.
Sushil sir, you can ask your question.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, oh,
Yes,
sorry, my line is getting cut off a little bit, so the voice arrives to me a little bit late. There's a bit of latency. I will.
Ms. Rana, good morning. Myself, Sushil Kumar. I am DDG and working in IoT domain in TEC. I think you are from British Telecom. My first query is that whether the BT is using the one M2M based platform or some other platform.
We are heavily collaborating with one M2M. We don't have an official, we haven't adopted the any official platform yet, but we definitely have a preference to go with one M2M, and we are also representing one M2M at the ITUT standards. So we are definitely in favor of using one M2M.
We hope you will be using one M2M global platform in near future for the IoT.
Oh, definitely. We are heavily.
As you know, there is a large number of proprietary platforms
Yes.
Across the globe, not only in India, but also in Europe. And this European Union, in their one of the project on Horizon 2020, they released a report that around 400 platforms, more than 400 platforms, there are proprietary platforms, and they were not able to share the data across these platforms. Then they have given a project to AIoTI. But the AIoTI was not having any sync with the one M2M. So can you, what's your opinion about this, whether some other platforms based on this JTC1, SC41, IEEE, that is the platform released by SC41 specifications will be capable of sharing the data, or one has to move towards one M2M platform only. In India also, we are having only 3-4 platforms that is based on one M2M, and what I feel, more than 90% platforms, they are the proprietary platforms. So how the security can be built up throughout the life cycle of the devices which are being onboarded on the platform, and how, because the proprietary platform cannot be thrown away, and we can install overnight the one M2M based platforms.
Absolutely.
So how the security, what is your opinion, how the security can be built up for the entire life cycle of the devices which are onboarded on those platforms?
Constant updating and patching of systems, it is very important, because all these systems, many of them have legacy softwares which has hardly been updated, and this makes it very vulnerable. So the legacy systems that has no updates, and all these proprietary systems, I think interoperability is very important in this case, to be able to achieve interoperability across all these different platforms. And this remains one of the main security issues, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentations. It is one of the biggest security issues for IoT. And this is why when we have these meetings, for example, with the ITUT SG20, we have experts from across the globe, from so many countries, and these problems are regularly discussed, and we are always trying to improve one M2M. This is why I'm not being biased, but I think one M2M is one of the best platforms, because of the constant development and aim to achieve interoperability. We also had an interoperability event last year. There will be another one. So we are constantly working on finding solutions for these problems, and a part of how we are doing this is having regular collaboration with international organizations like the ITUT, and always being at the forefront of what is happening. I cannot comment on other platforms, how they are developing. There are several platforms, and and everyone is trying to achieve that, to develop, to make sure that the devices are secure, the systems are updated. But for 1M2M, I am feeling very positive, especially after our collaboration with the ITUT and the constant development that we are achieving. There are really a lot of hardworking experts that go into
Yeah,
very,
no
very
doubt, no
technical
doubt.
meetings.
I'm
So
also attending all the meetings of the ITUT SG20, whether in question 2 or question 7 and others.
so we will meet
Yeah.
on the 18th of July then. So we
I
have good
can't say whether
news.
I will be moving there, but I shall be attending the meetings, whether in person or remote.
Definitely.
Madam, you mentioned the vulnerability. What is your opinion about the vulnerability management policy that has been described by IoT SF and so many other standardization bodies across the globe? Whether the manufacturers they should be held responsible for managing the vulnerabilities and updating the software over the year. What's your opinion?
I think it's a joint responsibility between the users and the manufacturers. I mean, telcos, if we onboard a vendor, there needs to be, because IoT is really up and coming, it's constantly developing. I think it's about reaching a balance between operators and vendors. We can't completely rely on the vendor, and also standards bodies come in place because it regulates that. So it's about finding a balance, really, and I believe that a lot of vendors have been paying more attention to that, especially given the fact that there are so many legacy systems with very little to none in terms of updates. So many of the systems haven't been updated at all, but manufacturers these days are really paying more attention to that. And as long as the conversation is going both with telcos, manufacturers, vendors, and standards bodies, I believe that a solution will be reached, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And it is worth mentioning that now 1M2M will have some leadership position in the upcoming ITUT SG20 meetings. So we are becoming a part of the leadership team, which is very good. It gives us more influence, and it gives us the chance to be at the forefront of development. So
That's
yeah.
really great. But would you like to mention you are closely associated with 1M2M, whether the security standards which was left out while adopting the 1M2M release 2 that has been adopted by ITUT or
Yes.
or
So basically, it was a huge piece of work. The ITUT and 1M2M have been having all these meetings. You might have attended some of them on how we
No. I
can
have attended all
transpose.
the meetings from 2015 onwards till today.
Oh, great.
Yes, all virtual or physical. I have attended all the meetings.
Perfect. So the summary is we are nearly done with transposing the ITUT recommendations into release 2. So it has been endorsed. It is definitely endorsed by the ITUT. Most of the remaining work is just admin issues, really, about referring, for example, giving annexes numbers
Okay.
instead of names,
And
or things
what's
like
the
that.
fate of 1M2M release 3 adoption in ITUT study group 20?
So at the technical plenary level, there has been a conversation on developing a 3GPP-like model on doing the transposition, because the way we have done the transposition for release 2 was through having so many meetings, and it did take a lot of time. So at the technical plenary level, they are discussing a new model of collaboration between ETSI, 1M2M, and the ITUT. It's very positive. So they are reaching, they are close to developing this new model. Hopefully this will be announced in the next SG20 meeting. But definitely once we're done, which we almost are with
Yeah, it will reduce the
with
time
release
of
2.
adoption. Yeah.
Yes. We will definitely transpose the other releases. It will be done through a different model, so hopefully it will take much less time and it will be an easier process for all those involved.
So are you people are also using or you can guide the people for using the ITUT standard X.509 and its corrigendum for the secure onboarding of the IoT devices at the platform, and platform should be capable of detecting the vulnerabilities, and then it should get addressed through the manufacturers or the researchers. So are you also, what's your opinion? You people will be advising to others?
Oh yes, yes, yes. It is definitely the ITUT recommendation. The ITUT standards are done in collaboration with M2m, and we strongly recommend using them. And the content. So basically, it is based on M2m recommendations. It is we are sharing this material, and it is just it's just a
But
different way.
I'm mentioning about the ITUT recommendation, that is X.509.
Yes, yes.
It's a very old recommendation, and its revisions are done every year. And this is one of the strongest this standard that is being used for the secure onboarding of the devices at the platform.
Mhm.
And it
Yes.
for the entire life cycle, because the no unique identity has been developed in the IoT devices. And the work is in process, and even the IMEI can be hacked, and multiple IMEI can be created. Therefore, to avoid all these things, X.509 is generally, ITU has recommended to use X.509 standard for this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, sir. It's been a very interesting conversation, and looking forward to meeting you in the next ITUT meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, it will be my pleasure.
Well, pleasure is all mine. Thanks very much.
So, Rana, can you take one more question, or should we close?
Yes, yes, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so we have one question in the chat box which says, what are the security provisions that were added in the release 4 over the ones mentioned in release 2 of M2m TS security solutions? What requirements led to these additions? In brief, probably you would like to answer.
I think the best person to answer this would be Roland Hechtportner, because he was responsible for release 4. So I don't want to miss any of the extra features. There has been 2 or 3. I could share a diagram, but I don't want to miss one exactly, because the expert on that would be Roland. But I could email you if you please put your if anyone is interested in that, I could share the answer by email after checking with Roland.
Can I reply this? This one M2M releases, they are backward compatible like 3GPP, and this even the security specifications which have been standardized in release 2, they can also be will be used in release 4. There are new recommendations as well as the updation of the old recommendations.
Thank you, sir.
If you give me 1 second, I have the diagram here. I could share the diagram. I could do that after my next colleague's presentation, because the diagram is one that we presented to the ITUT, and it should include the updated security functionality. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to be able to present it, then I can show the diagram.
Right now you can do it.
Okay, 1 second. Just finding the diagram. 1 second. I just need 1 minute because I'm using a different laptop. So if possible, I can do that after the next presentation, if that's okay. I'll just share the diagram very quickly after that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
So you are waiting, it means you'll be there?
Oh, yes. I'll be there until the end of the webinar, so.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Rana, for the wonderful presentation and discussion, the details that you shared with the participants from M2m. And you promptly agreed for this session despite your extremely busy schedule. So we are really thankful to you, and we'll get back to you just after the last presentation. So, okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
So, participants, now we move on to the last session. by Mr. Yair Poplowski. Are you there, Mr. Yair?
Certainly, I am here. And
Okay.
hello, everyone.
So we welcome you to this webinar. And let me introduce you to the participants. Okay. So we have with us Mr. Yair Poplowski from Orchestra Group. He is VP APAC and he's from Israel. He is a technologist and an AI specialist focusing on the big data analytics and actionable intelligence. He has 30 years experience of fighting in the forefront of cyber warfare, creating and prompting strategies, platforms, and solutions across industries and geographies in order to mitigate cyber terrorism and cyber crime to help create a safer world. Earlier, he was Lieutenant Colonel in Israel Intelligence Corps. So with this introduction, I would request Yair to start the presentation. We welcome you again.
Yes, thank you, Deepak, and thank you, Rana, for a fascinating lecture. I was a bit late to join, but it was very, very interesting. I will try to share my screen. Please let me know when you can see the presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you are clearly audible. We can hear you clearly.
And can you see the presentation?
I think it's coming. Yes, we can see. Risk and resilience, the adversarial approach.
Okay. So, hello, everyone. My name is Yair. As said, I am the VP, the regional VP for Orchestra Group. And in this session, I would like to try to share our view of this IoT cybersecurity world from the adversarial approach. And what I mean by that is that we will try to kind of look at how the hackers or the criminal organizations or what we call the enemies are looking at us yourself as a government agency and us as those who are maybe trying to support your efforts to protect the organizations and run a safer world. So I'm going to keep it a bit high level, but I will be very happy to deep dive on whatever that you feel that can benefit from that. So again, any questions, anything, please write them down, and Deepak and the team will be instrumental in transmitting those questions. Just a few words about Orchestra to explain who we are and what we do. Basically, we are an international company, but our roots are from Israel. And a few years back, when we formed Orchestra, most of us have a lot of, I would say, offensive cyber experience. This is what we bring to the table. So you might say that we know the attacker better than we know the defender. And what we thought that would be instrumental for the defense in cybersecurity is to bring some of this knowledge of how companies, organizations, and countries are being compromised and attacked in order to help those companies, government, organizations, and countries better protect themselves. And this is the essence and the base of our technology and our solutions. This is just random, it's not a random, but it's a recent collection of a few cybersecurity attacks. And what they have in common is that all of them share components of wireless or IoT or sometimes OT components that were used in order to compromise those organizations. And like Rena told us in the earlier lecture, this whole space of air air-based attacks or air surface attacks is really overlooked or under-regulated. We will discuss that further, but precisely because of that, it's a very dangerous vector of attack. Because it's not regulated, there is an acute shortage of technologies and knowledge and understanding of how to defend. And B, because the nature of those attacks, in difference to wired attacks, is that they happen very fast. So in order to do something about it, you either need to prepare yourself very well or to be very ready to mitigate those attacks once they happen. Now, an old professor of mine once told us that to ask an architect to plan a city is like asking a writer to write a library. That means that the world that we live in today is just way too complicated. There are too many moving parts, too many rules and regulations, too many technologies, sometimes too many people doing too many things. And if you look at the single node of the cybersecurity officer and his team of a company, they have a hard time. They have a hard time because there's a big conflict between functionality and security. These CISOs many times come to organizations that already been working for years, and when they've been working for years, they didn't have any built-in by design protocols and technologies to help them. Because at the end of the day, when you come to design a system, an ERP, a CRM, tax payment system, you try to design it as efficient and as smooth as possible. You seldom design them resilient. You seldom design them thinking that somebody will intentionally try to compromise them. So the systems are interdependent, so you harm one part and the rest can be harmed. They weren't designed usually to sustain these cyber attacks that keep on getting stronger and stronger. Many times, the monitoring of those systems, understanding what is really happening, is geared toward operation. You know, the server is up, the server is down, the communication is connecting, not connecting, data is being lost, not being lost. All of that, there's a lot of tools for that. But there are less tools and less energy and sometimes less budget, many times less budget to actually monitor the cybersecurity or the cyber space. And this gives the adversaries an in. And think about it. The challenge of an organization is to run everything. And the challenge of the CISO might be to protect everything. And the challenge of the hacker is to really find one or two or half a way in through the cracks of an existing system. Now, here is a kind of a frustrating thing, but it's true. We look at compliance as a way to secure ourselves, right? You need to do that and that and that, so-and-so scans per year, use this mechanism, this firewall, this endpoint protection, MITRE, NIST, all of those protocols and methodologies come to help us make our organizations more secure. But if you look at it from a hacker's point of view, that's a roadmap for the hacker, because a hacker looks at a very organized organization that follows this type of policies, and the hacker knows exactly what kind of methodologies and sometimes which tools this organization is using. It's like when you are playing cricket or you're playing basketball and you give your adversary your playbook. This is the drills I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to try to win. And now when he knows that, that gives these hackers an edge or an advantage, and he certainly, or they certainly, don't give us their playbook. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to understand their playbook and show the companies that we work with or the organizations we work with what could be the hackers' playbook. And once you know that, you might be better at defending yourself. Again, let's look at a typical security defense. Now let's leave the full organization and focus a little bit on the actual security defenses. Most of them are planned bottom up. Once there was none, and now there are some, and and you add more, and you subtract one, and you buy another firewall, and you add another new technology that can protect the data leakage, etc., etc. But most of the construct is built from the ground up and accumulative. And usually, when a CISO or even a CEO is deciding where to invest, which technology to buy, what to do, usually they look inside. They look at the organization and say, okay, what's missing? Where am I more exposed? But they never ask the question from the hacker's point of view. How can a hacker attack me? That's a different type of question. And the metaphor that we use is like might be a very good and able and trained and strong boxer getting into the ring with his eyes or her eyes blindfolded. Thus, you never know when the blow is going to come and where the blow is going to come from. Not only that, the fact that one blow came from one direction doesn't mean that the next one will come from that direction. So there is no learning curve in this case, because blows can come from anywhere, and if you are blindfolded, you will never see them coming. And we call this the risk analysis, understanding where possibly can those attacks come from. And this is why we say, look at the world from your adversarial eyes. Let's discuss briefly the nature of the cybersecurity technologies. This is very important. First of all, by nature, they're isolated. One company seldom talks to another company. You can have a VPT from one company and a scanner from another company and a breach and attack simulation from a third company. And again, good luck making them work together, because they weren't designed to work together with other technologies. Many of those technologies today are still manual. They don't use too much artificial intelligence, and because they are manual, they depend on our attention, our ability, our resources, and the time that we have to allocate. Also, you will find that a lot of those technologies are reactive. Once something happens, what do you do then? How do you recover? How do you find them, etc.? We call them right of bank technologies. Bank is the point of entry. The minute you have been, or the place where you have been attacked, there are technologies that are left of bank before what you can do to prepare yourself, and technologies that are right of bank. Forensic technologies, they happen after, and they are by nature reactive. So the result is a very unorganized, accumulative, and reactive type of defense, both from the strategy, methodology, and technology. Now, when you look again at the hacker from the point of view of the hacker, we say weak defenses create ample opportunities for net phishing, spear phishing, and this is important because there are two ways in which companies usually get compromised. On the other, I'll say from the other round, there are two methodologies or two basic methodologies that hackers would use. One of them is what we call the net phishing. That means that they spread wide. They try everything, look for the open ports, look for the unsecured devices. And then once they find that one they can attack, that means that you really need to have wide defenses. The other one are very focused attacks. That are very professional organizations that are up or off to find the critical data or the crown jewels or the critical processes of that organization. One of the things that we see today, there's a shift. If you look at cyber or hacker or cyber attacks, I don't know, even 5 years ago or more, it was mainly about data theft. Okay, you compromise a bank, you steal the data, a casino, a PII, personal information, and with that data you make money. You sell it, you exploit it, etc., etc. Now, with the entrance of IoT and the fact that a lot of our processes are going from being manual and offline to automatic and online, there is a whole new different types of attacks who are more related to process interruption. Many times when we look at the IoT or the wireless world, we will see that those attacks have this nature of being process interruption. Because at the end of the day, let's put it on the table. If you lost data, in many cases, you might lose your privacy. You might lose a lot of money. You might lose many of those things, but it doesn't really put you in life-threatening peril because there's no really physical process that is being interrupted. So, you know, the bank went bankrupt. It is bad, but it's not the end of the world. On the other hand, today, when you have an airplane or a water pump or an electricity valve that is actually IoT operated, and this is the part that is getting attacked, then that is getting a bit more serious or sometimes much more serious because we're no longer talking about data theft. We are now talking about process interruption. And that in many ways can affect the life of the people around us or the people that are under our responsibility if you are a government agency in a much more severe way. And as you can see and know, the world is going towards there. There are more and more and more processes that are digital, are online, are IoT based. Now, I'm jumping from the adversarial approach to the defender so you can kind of get accustomed to look at the world from both sides. Obviously, we all know that this phrase, you know, the human factor is the weakest link, is really true. And the guardians of the empire, those CISOs, those blue teams, those people who are in charge of tasking of protecting our environment, they are, I would say, between the rock and the hard place. They have lack of resource. That's generally lack of training, lack of time. Many times, as we say, they don't know what they are defending against. So they, you know, stumble blindly into very complicated situations. And mainly, and this we see across many types of organizations, public and private, they lack the holistic, clear directive from management. And any one of us who ever tried to get budget from a CEO for cybersecurity purposes knows that there is a gap. Sometimes it's a chasm between what the actual CISOs or the security team needs and the understanding of the management of why are we allocating these resources and this money and this time and this attention, because it's quite difficult to explain the dangers that these cyber attacks can have on the reality. Eventually, when we look at how most defenses look like, I believe that this illustration kind of is kind of correct. So, a part of being a cute cat, I think that the situation is not in our favor right now. And the question is, okay, this is it. So what? We give up, we lay back, we don't do anything, we keep on doing what we have been doing so far, although we know that it's not Sometimes, many times, it's not as effective as it should be. I think this is some of the questions that yourself and us and the public sector and the vendors and the private sector and the whole world of what we call the white hats are trying to understand. And I will just give you a few examples of how we suggest that this bad or severe situation should be approached. In orchestra, we call it building arcs before the rain. And what we are saying, and as I told you, you remember, we come from the intelligence world. So we've been around data and around actionability and actionable insights the better part of our lives. And what we think that should be done in this case is, first of all, understand the risk exposure. And when I say the risk exposure, is understand where are you really at risk. You know, you might scan your network and you might have 10,000 vulnerabilities. You look at it from the defender side, you're saying, okay, that's an impossible task. No one can fix or can patch 10,000 vulnerabilities, certainly not in the 2 weeks that I have to do that. But if you look at the same 10,000 vulnerabilities from a hacker's point of view, you will find that only 1,000 vulnerabilities, only 10%, only 8%, only 12% of those vulnerabilities are really exploitable. Because, you know, hackers are also human organizations. They share the same shortcomings as we do. They need resources, they need people, they need money, they need time, they are exposed, we can discover them. So they also have vulnerabilities, they also have limitations, and out of the 10,000 vulnerabilities, we almost can guess which vulnerabilities they will exploit because they are the easiest one to exploit, or the most immediate ones, or the ones that will actually get them to where they want to get. And this is also a question. What are those hackers after? If a company spends all its energy in just defending the perimeter, that might be an interesting strategy, but it's not effective because you can never defend your entire perimeter, especially not when you're talking about IoT and smart connected devices. But maybe if you understand what are your critical assets and focus on defending only them, on the risk of being compromised in the extremities, you might create a much, much more effective defense, and you might make the work or the mission of the hacker way more difficult and maybe even impossible. So that's the first, what we call pillar. The second one is policy. Now, also policy is not something we think. It's not something that you can adapt from the shelf. Because let's say a MITRE or a NIST or a policy that was well written in England, that doesn't mean that is completely relevant to India. And it might be partly relevant to India, but maybe to this organization, it is relevant. And to this organization, it is relevant in a different flavor. And the first thing that an organization should ask itself is, what is my risk appetite? How much risk am I willing to take? And this is probably the most difficult question for the directive, for the directors, for the managers to decide. Because if you ask them head on, okay, what is the risk are you willing to take? I know that your mics are off, but does anyone want to venture a guess? What would be the answer?
The unrealistic answer is usually none, but it's very
Exactly.
unrealistic.
Who is that? Who said that?
Reina, hi.
Rena, you are completely correct. That would be the answer. What do you mean? What kind of cyber risk I'm willing to take? Zero. I'm not willing to take any cyber risk. Now, we all know that the only way, maybe, to not take any cyber risk is to take all your electronic equipment, dig a very deep hole, throw all the equipment into the deep hole, pour concrete on it, and then maybe you're not taking any cyber risks. Today with IoTs, you would still be taking risks. But you need to be mature. The world, the organizations, the management need to be mature about it. There is no such thing as zero risk. If you say zero risk, you're saying 100% risk. There is a number in the middle. There is a level of risk that an organization should be willing to take. Because if it doesn't take any risk, it cannot function. You cannot be a digital organization without taking cybersecurity risks. Now, once you understand what kind of risks you're willing to take, then you're saying, okay, this is a risky part, but I'm willing to take the risk. The damage in this part is such that I can endure. On the other hand, on my domain controller or on my access to the public, I'm not willing to take any risk. Okay, now we're starting to have an intelligent conversation, knowing that an attacker cannot attack you everywhere. You know that an attack, or you can find out that an attacker can attack you in point A, B, C, D. And you're saying, out of those, I can defend 2. What should I defend? A and C, B or D? Those are questions that organizations need to start learning how to ask. And the way to ask those questions is our third pillar, which is the consequence and the impact. Even the vocabulary of how we look at cyber risk needs to change, because 0 and 1 is no longer an answer. You need to say, okay, I'm willing to take 90% risk or 80% risk or 10% risk here and 30% risk here. And you need to be able to explain to the management, what is the difference? Where are you exposed? What can happen if your assumptions are or aren't correct? And for that, you need to have data. You need to be able to analyze this data. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to put in place effective measures that will actually determine that the risk is 30 and not 70 or not 80. Because saying, okay, here I'm willing to take 50% risk, and the controls you're putting in place are not actually helping you, then you're actually taking 100% risk without even you knowing that. So this is kind of the way we propose or we think about risk, and we think that if an organization can start thinking and measuring itself in these parameters, then we might be able to build an effective defense that can really keep the hackers off our premises. Or even if they do get into our premises, they will not be able to cause any real damage. This is, as we say, the planning part. Now let me jump or try to implement this. There's a question? Okay, maybe we leave the questions for the end. Let's look at it from an airspace security attack. Remember what I told you, the problem with airspace and IoT and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is that we look at it as the Wild West, right? There are uncontrolled devices, nobody knows about them, nobody knows what they can do, they have unupdated firmware, unencrypted communication. All of that is really the reality. I don't think that there is any one organization that can say, okay, I'm in control of my airspace. Not even that, I'm not even talking about control, just knowing what you have. Think about how a modern hospital is looking like. There are respirators transmitting to the nurse station, and there is MRIs transmitting to the operation table, and there are the phones of the regular personnel and the guests and the electronic beds, and all of that is almost, it's not almost, it is usually a very big chaos. Now, as we said in the beginning, this chaos is the best hunting ground for the hackers. So one of the few things that we believe that can be done in this case is just airspace security hygiene. know what you have, know which kind of, don't even start doing anything. Just have an inventory, know what kind of reality you're facing. And on the other hand, you need to know what kind of attacks and what kind of tactics the hacker can use, because you might have something that you think is completely exposed and you will invest a lot of money in defending it, but there is no actual tactic that can be used in order to exploit that specific vulnerability. And then you will be wasting your energy when you don't have, when you don't need, and not wasting it where you do need. We already talked about process disruption. This is a filter that we need to learn to look at it. You know, you say, and this is a true story, the Ministry of Health of Singapore was attacked was 2 years ago, and there was a lot of PII, private information stolen from those servers. This was bad. This was even very bad, but it wasn't a national disaster. You know, people's private data was compromised, and of course it shouldn't happen. But it's not that a hospital stopped working because of that. And a hospital can stop working if it's under an IoT attack. You can see what is happening today with Russia and Ukraine. You can see what is happening with Iran and Israel. There's unfortunately a lot of examples of how these process interruptions can manifest. Now, the one thing that is a bit unique to the airspace is it is very hard to enforce a policy in airspace. In connected system, you're saying this device cannot connect to that device. They cannot be connected with a password. There's a firewall. There's an endpoint protection. There's a lot of technologies that today know how to enforce the policies. And the policies, they also are known. There are very few effective, smart, intelligence policies in the airspace. And there's even less the ability to enforce those policies. And the last thing I would like to show in this slide is the issue of mitigation. Remember, we already discussed that at the end of the day, you need to do something. You can have the best policies, you can have the best or the most accurate devices and control and security devices, but if you're not doing anything with them, or if they're not doing anything to actually keep the attackers out, or stop them, or find them, or isolate them, or erase them, or whatever, then it is just fancy firework. And there is a question: how do you actually do mitigation on the airspace? So the part of the execution is also very important. You can do the best planning in the world. If you don't do a proper execution, then really it looks good on the slides, but in real life, it doesn't really create a more secure world. Conclusion, because I think I'm over the time. Let me quote you Sun Tzu, the Chinese general that wrote The Art of War. He said, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory you gain, you will suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So, ladies and gentlemen, you do need to ask yourselves, where are you on the Sun Tzu scale? I think we can open the floor for questions. Hopefully there are some.
Participants may ask any question by raising hand or typing in the chat box.
Deepak, Rana Kamil has posted a diagram in the chat box. So
Yes.
those who are interested, they can see that.
Yes. Actually, she was supposed to be here till the last, till the webinar ends, but because of some meeting, she has left. So whatever questions were asked regarding the release 4 and the updates and all these things, she has given the inputs and the diagram also. So anybody who is interested may just take note of it. And so here, can you just switch on your video for a moment? Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Yeah. So I can see one question which was posted 20 minutes back. I think it is, please see. It says, what is the benchmark reference to define the percent of the risk? Is it not too much hypothetical?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So excellent question. I'll answer it from two directions. First of all, I hope that the need to assess the level of risk is clear. Because again, if you don't have any kind of way to assess what is more dangerous than the other one, then we're just guesstimating. We're not really doing anything that we don't have any data to take decisions, because at the end of the day, we cannot protect everything. And the question, what is the number or how much, is in the heart of the problem, because the answer has to be, the question is generic, but the answer has to be given on any specific organization, because it depends who is asking that question. And the tools, at least that we are building, are very site and company specific, because we know that a government organization in India is very different from a government organization in Vietnam. And we know that a private bank might be very different from a public bank. Same for a hospital, same for a factory. So yes, we do need to ask the question, I think. The common denominator are the parameters. At the end of the day, there are a certain number of parameters that we think that contribute to that risk. The type of devices, the number of devices, the geographical spread, the level of proficiency of the people, the budget, the threats that this organization is having. If you are at war, it's one kind of threat. If you're at peace times, it's another kind of threat. So again, the question is simple. The answer is quite complicated, but even if it's so, we need to be able to give a mathematical or a quantifiable answer to that question. I hope I answered that question.
Thanks. Any other question from anybody in the chat box or through the raised hand? Yeah, we have one question which says, how can you deal with the extremely diverse firmware and types of IoT devices?
Can you please repeat the question?
The question is, how can you deal with the extremely diverse firmware and types of IoT devices?
May I ask?
Here, can you?
Yeah. May I ask who asked the question? Because it's a wonderful question. Look, Rena was talking earlier about the how you need to know who's the vendor, how you manufacturers are finally getting more and more patches and security patches. But we know that legacy. I could ask the forum, by the way, here is a question, and please answer by the chat. How many smart connected devices exist in the world? Just throw a number in the chat box. I would love to see what you think. But before I answer that question, or try to answer that question, one of the problems with IoTs or smart connected devices, or they're you can hardly, or you cannot apply connected policies of patching and remediation to the IoT world, because you don't control those devices, or you don't control half of those devices, or even if you do, they don't have security patches. So even if you do know what kind of brand is your router and what it's connected to, when you come to patch it, you cannot, because again, there's no patches. So what we propose in this case is to look at the common denominator. Our technologies, what they do, instead of looking at the devices and interfering with the devices and trying to strengthen those devices, our technologies look at the transmission, because it doesn't matter if it's a Huawei or an Oppo or an iPhone. All of them, when they communicate to each other, they communicate via Wi-Fi. It can be a respirator, a very ancient respirator that has a very low level of Wi-Fi transmission. It's still Wi-Fi protocol, or it can be a Bluetooth protocol. So when we design our technologies, we're saying, instead of trying to keep this world control, which we can't, we can focus on the connection, on the connectivity, on the fact that this device needs a Wi-Fi protocol in order to connect to that device. And also, if you look at it from the hacker's point of view, they might have a Pineapple or an Alpha device. There's a lot of devices that can perform these airborne cyber attacks, but they will either use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So once you have some kind of mechanism that can actually control the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth communication, then you can do something about it without trying to solve this problem, which is completely unsolvable. I don't see any numbers, so maybe you're too shy. So let's do it by a show of hands. Okay, you have the hand in the app. How many of you think that there are more than 10 billion smart connected devices? 35 million. 10 to 13 billion. Okay, we're getting there. How many of you think that there are more than 50 billion smart connected devices? I think you're getting there, but you're still short. Because again, just do a simple calculation, I don't know, 8 billion people in the world. Let's say that only half of them have access to IoT devices, right? Half of them, 8 billion. Every one of us has at least 10 smart connected devices: computer, laptop, telephone, router, earphones, PlayStation, whatever. So we're already around the 40, 50 billion. And we didn't count the factories and their hospitals and their ports and So again, the real answer is nobody really knows. Because we are talking for about half an hour. There are 20 million more, 40 million more, 100 million more devices being produced as we speak. And this number will keep on growing and growing and growing. My personal estimate is that we're way over 80 billion. But I might be wrong. There might be more. I'm sure. I'm at least not sure. There's probably more. And the reason I'm saying that is that when we think about the scale and the complexity, we need to understand that there is need for new policies, new technologies, new approach, because we simply cannot take the technologies and the approach and the policies of a wired world and simply implement them on the wireless world because it's a completely different world in almost any aspect that we can think of. Questions?
Yeah.
You can say them out loud also. My English is quite okay.
Yeah, Mr. Devarito. Devadritro.
I think somebody is trying to talk.
If you ask any question, you can unmute your mic and ask. I think he raised hand while Yev was asking for raising hands. Okay.
Okay.
So if there are no more questions, then we can close this session.
Yeah, I think it's almost time for lunch. I'm competing with lunch. I don't want to do that. Or maybe it's past lunch. But just 2 words of conclusion. First of all, thank you, Deepak and the organization for inviting me to talk. I hope that it was instrumental and maybe you learned something new. And the second word that I can tell you is that really, when you deal with a cybersecurity issue, the first thing you should do is try to look at it from the hacker's point of view. I believe it will clarify a lot of things. It will simplify a lot of things, and it will help you focus on what is really, really important. Because again, if it's not exploitable, if it's not valuable, if it's not something that a hacker might invest time and money and resources in it, then it's of a lower priority. And this is the one you should be looking at, not at yourselves, but at the one who is attacking you. Because then you can do or concentrate effort where you can really be hurt. If you remember that from this lecture, then my work is done. Well, at least the beginning of my work.
Yes, yes, we are really actually very grateful to you that you gave such a wonderful presentation, and you agreed immediately when we requested you. And I would request DDG ICT, my boss, Srinivas sir, to say a few words. We have here with us, sir. Sir, you are on mute, sir. Sir, you are on mute.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Deepak.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. And it was really a wonderful webinar with 4 great presentations by 4 eminent speakers. So I thank each of the speakers. I mean, all the participants, including officers from NTIPRIT, we all got benefited from today's webinar. So thank you so much. We have already exceeded the time, but it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Though we have exceeded time, we have learned a lot. So thank you once again. We can end the webinar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sharad-ji. Thank you, here, and thank you all, dear participants. We hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.